You can feel tired even when you haven't done anything particularly difficult. Not physically, but in a way that feels harder to explain. As if your mind has been moving for too long without ever fully stopping. There is always something next, something waiting. Something that seems to need your attention before you've even finished what you're doing now. It doesn't always feel urgent, yet it rarely feels like it can be left alone. This constant movement can become so familiar that it no longer feels like movement at all. It simply becomes the way things are. You move through your day, responding, deciding, adjusting, often without noticing how little space there is between one moment and the next. Even when nothing is demanding your attention, your mind may continue as if something still is. That quiet continuation can make slowing down feel less like a choice and more like something that requires effort. Because everything around you keeps moving, stopping can feel like falling behind, even when there is nothing to catch up to. There can be a subtle sense that if you pause, something will be missed, or something will continue without you. This makes stillness feel unfamiliar, even when part of you begins to need it. Yet, within all of this, there can be small moments where something shifts. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet recognition that the pace you are moving at does not fully match how you want to feel. That recognition does not stop anything, though it stays with you in a way that is difficult to ignore once it is noticed. The pace you move at is not always something you consciously choose. It can begin to build around you, shaped by expectations, habits, and the way everything seems to continue without pause. Even when there is no immediate pressure, there can still be a sense that you should keep going. This feeling does not always come from urgency. Sometimes it comes from the absence of a clear place to stop. When one moment leads directly into the next, without space in between, movement becomes the default. It starts to feel easier to continue than to interrupt the flow. Pausing can feel like stepping outside of something that is already in motion, as if you would need to catch up again once you return. Because of this, even rest can begin to feel like a decision that needs to be justified. There can also be a quiet belief that slowing down means falling behind, even when there is no clear measure of what behind actually is. This belief does not always appear as a thought. It can exist more subtly, shaping how you respond to time without needing to be fully noticed. So you continue. Not because you are being forced, but because everything around you makes continuation feel natural. The movement becomes self-sustaining, carrying you forward even when part of you begins to feel the need for something different. Trying to slow down can feel more difficult than continuing, even when you know you need it. The moment you begin to pause, something in you may resist, not strongly, but enough to make stopping feel unfamiliar. There can be a sense that you should keep going just a little longer, finish one more thing, respond to one more message, complete one more task. That feeling does not always come from urgency. It can come from the momentum that has already been built. When movement has been continuous, stopping requires a shift that does not feel immediate. It can feel like interrupting something that is still in motion, as if the rhythm itself does not easily allow for stillness. Because of this, even a small pause can begin to feel slightly uncomfortable. Not because anything is wrong, but because the absence of movement feels unfamiliar. Your attention may begin to look for something to return to, something to continue, something to fill the space that is opened. That pull back into motion can happen quickly, almost automatically. Before you fully notice the pause, you may already find yourself moving again. This creates a kind of friction, where slowing down is not just about stopping, but about staying in that space without immediately leaving it, and that can feel harder than it seems. When movement slows, even for a moment, something else begins to come into view. It is not always a sense of calm right away. Instead, there can be a subtle discomfort, something that feels slightly unfamiliar, even if you cannot fully explain why. The quiet does not feel empty. It feels different. Without something immediate to respond to, your attention no longer has a clear direction to follow. That lack of direction can create a gentle restlessness, as if your awareness is searching for where to go next. There can be a quiet sense that something should be happening, even when nothing needs to. This feeling does not come from urgency, but from contrast. When your usual rhythm has been constant movement, stillness can feel like something outside of what you are used to. It is not that stillness is uncomfortable on its own. It is that your mind has been moving for so long that stopping feels unfamiliar at first. In that unfamiliar space, other things can begin to surface. Thoughts that were less noticeable before may become clearer. Feelings that were softened by constant activity can begin to take shape. None of this is new, though it can feel that way because it is now easier to notice. Because of this, slowing down can sometimes feel less like rest and more like awareness. Not in an overwhelming way, but in a way that is more direct than what you are used to. This can make the quiet feel harder to stay in, even when part of you recognizes that this is where you need to be. The discomfort is not something you created. It is simply what becomes visible when everything else is no longer covering it. It is often in that quiet space that the urge to move again begins to appear, not as a strong decision, but as a gentle pull, something that suggests returning to what feels more familiar. Your attention may start looking for something to do, something to check, something to continue. This does not come from necessity. It comes from how natural movement has become. When stillness feels unfamiliar, activity can feel like a place to return to. It provides direction, structure, and something to hold on to. Because of this, Even a brief pause can quickly turn back into motion without much thought. You may notice yourself reaching for your phone, opening something, or shifting your focus outward again. It happens quietly, almost automatically, as if your awareness is following a path it already knows well. This return to movement does not always feel like a choice. It can feel like something that simply happens when there is nothing else guiding your attention. The discomfort of stillness does not need to be strong for this to occur. Even a small sense of unfamiliarity can be enough to pull you back into motion. And once that movement begins again, the pause that came before it can fade just as quickly. What makes this pattern difficult to notice is how natural it feels. It does not stand out as something you are doing. It feels like the default way your attention continues. After repeating this cycle enough times, it can begin to feel like something you don't even notice anymore. The movement away from stillness and back into activity becomes so familiar that it no longer stands out. It happens in small ways, often without a clear starting point. You pause, something feels slightly unfamiliar, and before you fully register it, your attention shifts again. There is no clear decision in that moment, no deliberate choice to avoid stillness. It simply unfolds in a way that feels natural. This is how patterns begin to form, not through intention, but through repetition. Each time you return to movement, it reinforces the sense that this is where your attention is meant to go. Over time, the pattern becomes smoother, more automatic, less noticeable. The transition from stillness to activity shortens, sometimes disappearing entirely. Because of this, it can feel as though you are always moving, even when nothing is asking you to. The habit does not need to be strong, it only needs to be consistent. And when it is repeated often enough, it begins to shape how you relate to your own pace. Slowing down no longer feels like a simple shift. It feels like stepping outside of something that has been quietly guiding you all along. After a while, this pace can begin to feel normal, even if it was never something you consciously chose. It no longer stands out as fast. It simply feels like the way things are. You may not question it, not because it feels right, but because it has become familiar enough to go unnoticed. When everything around you moves in a similar rhythm, there is little that signals a need to slow down. There is no clear contrast, no obvious moment that says something is off. Instead, the speed blends into the background, shaping your experience without drawing attention to itself. Because of this, slowing down can begin to feel unusual, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet sense that you are stepping outside of what is expected. You may notice a slight hesitation, as if you are doing something that does not quite match the pace around you. This feeling does not always come from external pressure. It can come from how deeply the rhythm has been absorbed. When a certain way of moving becomes consistent, it begins to feel like the default. Anything outside of it can feel less certain, even if it is what you need. This is how speed becomes normalized, not through force, but through repetition that gradually shapes what feels familiar. And once something feels familiar, it becomes easier to continue than to question. When you begin to move at a slower pace, even slightly, the difference can feel more noticeable than expected. It is not just a change in speed. It is a change in how everything feels. The rhythm that once carried you forward no longer matches your movement, and that shift can feel unfamiliar in a quiet but persistent way. You may find yourself becoming more aware of each moment, not because you are trying to, but because there is more space for awareness to settle. That space can feel open at first, though it can also feel uncertain. Without the usual pace guiding you, there is less structure to follow. This can create a subtle sense of hesitation, as if you are no longer moving with something, but on your own. Even simple actions can begin to feel slightly different. What once felt automatic may now require a bit more attention, not because it is difficult, but because it is no longer part of a continuous flow. This can make slowing down feel less smooth than expected. Not uncomfortable in an obvious way, but unfamiliar enough to be noticed. There can also be a quiet awareness of everything that continues moving around you. People, conversations, expectations, all maintaining their pace while you step slightly outside of it. This contrast can make your own stillness feel more visible, even if no one else is noticing it. Because of this, slowing down can feel like standing in a different current, where the movement around you continues, but you are no longer being carried in the same way. That difference does not need to be large to be felt. Even a small shift in pace can create a sense that you are no longer aligned with what is happening around you. And in that space, the unfamiliarity can make it tempting to return to what once felt easier. It does not take much for the pull of the old pace to return. Even after slowing down, there can be a quiet sense that it would be easier to go back. Not because something is wrong with slowing down, but because the previous rhythm still feels familiar. Familiarity has a way of drawing your attention without needing to demand it. It suggests a kind of ease, a path that requires less adjustment, less awareness. When you have spent a long time moving in a certain way, returning to it can feel almost automatic. The body knows the rhythm. The mind follows it without needing to think. In contrast, moving more slowly can feel like something that requires presence. Not effort in a heavy sense, but a kind of awareness that is not always comfortable at first. Because of this, there can be moments where you begin to speed up again without fully noticing when it happened. The shift can be gradual, almost invisible, until you realize you are back in the same flow as before. There is no clear decision to return. It simply unfolds, guided by what feels easier to follow. This does not mean you have done something wrong. It reflects how strongly familiar patterns can hold their place, even when you begin to step away from them. The pull is not forceful. It is quiet, steady, and persistent in its own way. And because it feels natural, it can be easy to follow without question. Even after returning to that familiar pace, something in you can begin to notice it again, not in a loud or urgent way, but as a quiet awareness that stays in the background. You may continue moving as usual, responding, deciding, keeping up with what is in front of you. At the same time, there can be a subtle sense that this rhythm does not fully match how you want to feel. It does not interrupt what you are doing, and it does not force you to stop. Still, once it is noticed, it tends to remain in a way that is difficult to completely ignore. Sometimes this awareness appears in small, almost unremarkable moments. You might briefly realize how quickly you have been moving without ever fully pausing to notice it. Or you may sense a slight disconnect between what you are doing and how present you feel while doing it. These moments pass quickly. They do not change your pace right away, yet they leave behind a quiet recognition that something feels slightly out of alignment. That recognition does not demand action. It simply stays with you, soft but persistent. It suggests, without insisting, that another way of moving might exist, even if it is not fully clear yet. This is not about rejecting the way you have been moving. It is about beginning to see it, just enough to know that it is not the only way. What begins as a small awareness does not stay exactly the same. It may seem subtle at first, easy to overlook, something that appears briefly and then fades into the background. Yet once it has been noticed, it tends to return in quiet ways. Not because you are trying to hold on to it, but because it has already become part of how you see your own pace. You may find yourself recognizing it more often, even while everything else continues as before. The movement does not stop, and your routines do not suddenly change. Still, there is a growing sense that you are more aware of how you are moving through them. This awareness does not need to be constant. It can appear and disappear, sometimes clear, sometimes barely noticeable. But each time it returns, it carries a familiarity that was not there before. That familiarity can make it easier to recognize when you are moving too quickly, even if you do not slow down right away. It begins to create a gentle contrast between how things are and how they could feel, not as a judgment, but as a quiet comparison that exists in the background. Because of this, the pace you once followed without question can start to feel slightly different. Not wrong, but no longer invisible. And when something is no longer invisible, it becomes harder to move through it without noticing. As this awareness becomes more familiar, it can begin to influence your pace in quiet ways. Not through effort, and not through a decision that you consciously make. Instead, the change happens more subtly, almost as if your movement begins to adjust on its own. You may notice small shifts. Perhaps you take a little more time before responding. Or you allow a moment to pass without immediately filling it with something else. These changes are not dramatic. They do not stand out in a way that feels forced. They simply reflect a growing sensitivity to how you are moving. When you are more aware of your pace, it becomes harder to move through everything without noticing the speed. This does not mean you suddenly stop or slow down completely. It means there is a slight change in how you relate to each moment. Some actions may begin to feel less rushed, even if everything around you continues at the same speed. There can be a growing sense that you are not entirely carried by the same momentum as before. Instead of being fully inside the movement, you begin to have a small amount of space within it. That space does not interrupt anything. It does not require you to step away, but it allows you to experience what you are doing with a bit more presence than before, and in that presence, the pace can begin to soften, even if only slightly. As these small shifts continue, the way you move through your day can begin to feel more steady, not slower in an obvious way and not disconnected from what is happening around you. Rather, there is a subtle sense of rhythm that begins to form, one that feels more grounded than before. You may still be doing the same things, responding, working, moving from one moment to the next. Yet something about the pace feels less scattered. There is less of a sense that you are being pulled in multiple directions at once. Instead, your attention can begin to stay a little longer with what is in front of you. This does not require effort. It happens because there is now enough awareness to notice when your pace begins to feel too fast. That noticing creates a natural adjustment, even if it is small. You may find that transitions between moments feel slightly smoother, not because everything has slowed down, but because you are no longer moving through them without any space at all. There can be a feeling that your actions are more connected to each other, rather than happening in a continuous rush. This creates a kind of stability that was not there before. Not a rigid structure, but a gentle consistency in how you move. And within that consistency, there is less need to keep up with everything at once. As your pace becomes more steady, something else begins to change as well. The pressure that once felt constant may start to soften, not all at once, but in ways that are gradually noticeable. It is not that your responsibilities disappear, and it is not that less is expected of you. What shifts is how those expectations are experienced. When everything was moving quickly, there could be a sense that each moment required an immediate response. That urgency created a kind of internal pressure, even when it was not fully recognized. Now, with a slightly more grounded rhythm, that same urgency may not feel as strong. There can be a small but meaningful difference between something needing to be done and it needing to be done right away. That difference creates space. Not a large space, but enough to change how you move through what is in front of you. you may notice that your attention feels less divided. There is less of a need to hold multiple things at once, and more of a sense that you can stay with one thing for a little longer. This does not slow everything down externally, but internally it can feel like there is less weight attached to each moment. The pressure does not disappear completely. It becomes lighter, less immediate, less demanding, and in that lightness, your experience begins to feel a little more at ease. As the pressure begins to soften, your emotional experience can begin to shift in quiet ways. It may not be something you immediately notice. There is no clear moment where everything feels different. Instead, the change is subtle, almost easy to overlook. You may find that your reactions feel less immediate than before, not because you are holding anything back, but because there is now a small space between what happens and how you respond. Within that space, your emotions have a little more room to settle. They do not need to rise as quickly, and they do not need to carry the same intensity. This does not mean you feel less. It means what you feel is not being pushed forward by the same sense of urgency. There can be a quiet sense of calm that appears in moments where there was once tension. Not a constant calm, and not something that replaces everything else, but something that begins to exist alongside your usual experience. You may notice it in how you move through small situations, in how you respond to something that would have felt more pressing before, or in the way your attention stays a little more steady, even when things around you continue to change. This shift does not remove emotion. It allows it to exist without being carried by the same speed. And in that difference, there can be a feeling of being slightly more at ease within yourself. As this way of moving becomes more familiar, it begins to feel less like something you are trying to do. At first, slowing down may have required awareness, small adjustments, and moments of noticing. Now, it can start to feel more natural, as if your pace is no longer something you need to constantly think about. There is less effort involved in staying present with what you are doing. You may find that you are not checking your speed as often. The awareness that once needed to be intentional becomes more integrated into how you move. This creates a sense of balance that does not feel forced. You are still responding to what is around you. You are still moving through your day. But there is less of a sense that you are being carried by something outside of your control. Instead, your pace begins to feel more aligned with how you actually want to experience each moment. This alignment does not need to be perfect. It does not require that everything feels calm all the time. It simply means that there is less tension between how things are happening and how you are moving through them. Because of this, the state you are in can begin to sustain itself. Not through effort, but through familiarity. What once felt unfamiliar now begins to feel like something you can return to without difficulty. What once felt like a small shift can begin to extend into more parts of your day. not as something you consciously apply, but as something that quietly carries through different moments. You may notice it in how you start your day before anything has fully begun. There can be a slight difference in how quickly you move into activity, as if there is no longer a need to rush into the first thing. It can also appear in the middle of your day, when things are already in motion. Even while responding and continuing, there can be a sense that you are not completely absorbed by the pace. A small part of your awareness remains steady, allowing you to stay connected to what you are doing without being pulled too quickly into the next thing. In moments that used to feel rushed, there can now be a bit more space. Not enough to stop everything, but enough to feel what is happening as it happens. This does not slow the world around you. It changes how you experience moving through it. The same conversations, the same tasks, the same expectations can still be there. Yet your way of being within them feels different, less compressed, less driven by urgency, more connected to each moment as it unfolds. This change does not need to be maintained. It continues because it has already become part of how you move. Nothing about this way of moving needs to be perfected for it to remain. It does not depend on always being aware, and it does not require you to hold on to it. There will still be moments when the pace around you feels faster again. Times when you move quickly without noticing, or when the rhythm of everything pulls you forward. That does not undo what has changed. It simply means you are still part of a world that continues to move. Within that movement, there is now something else available to you. A way of being that does not rely on keeping up with everything at once. You do not need to separate yourself from the pace around you. You can move within it while still staying connected to your own rhythm. This does not mean every moment will feel calm. It does not mean everything slows down. What it means is that you no longer need to move faster than you feel. There is space for your pace to exist as it is, and in that space, there can be a quiet sense of ease. Not because everything has changed, but because you are no longer trying to match everything else.